Welcome to the 4th Annual Food Justice Film Festival, presented by the Center for Biological Diversity. I'm Linda Rico, Communications Staff and Food Justice Film Festival Organizer with the Center. Our discussion today centers around one of our featured films this year, Food Chains, directed by Sanjay Rawal. Food Chains brings to light the necessity of ensuring a dignified life for all immigrant farm workers and for a more humane and transparent food chain. For today's discussion, I'm very grateful to be joined by Amelia Ceja, who is featured in the film and is the president and CEO of Ceja Vineyards. Amelia was an immigrant farm worker and was just 12 years old from Jalisco, Mexico, when she harvested her first grapes from a vineyard in Napa Valley. Today, she heads her own premium Mexican-American-owned winery in Napa Valley and Sonoma. Welcome, Amelia, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Hello, Linda, and thank you so much for inviting me. I look forward to sharing my story and that of the contribution of the farm workers to the wine industry and to the food industry.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm so excited to speak with you today. So let's jump right in then. I have to say your story is so inspiring. It's so unique. And being that you started as an immigrant farm worker on a vineyard to now owning your own, it's just incredible. So I wanted to see if you could just talk a bit about what that whole experience was like for you and your family working on the vineyard, and when you first started to decide that that's what you wanted to do.
Yes, so back in the mid-60s when there was immigration reform, my father was able to get my mother, my sister, and me resident status here in the U.S. So I had just finished 6th grade, and I arrived in the Napa Valley September 11, 1967, as a 12-year-old. And my father was well, he worked in the vineyards. He was in charge of a very large group of workers, and so it was harvest time, and the very first weekend he invited me to go and just explore what he did. And he was so proud, and he loves, he loved farming. So I was introduced to grape growing, picking grapes myself. And that very first weekend I told my dad I was going to have a vineyard of my own someday. And get this, I didn't speak a word. So fast forward to the 1980 when I married this young man that I had met that weekend back in 1990, Pedro Ceja. He had also just arrived from Michoacan, Mexico, and our fathers knew each other. So he has a very large family, and they desperately needed a job. So his dad asked my father for a job, and that very first weekend I met him, as well as his his 2 brothers, and now one of them is our partner as well. But in 1980 we were married, and that idea that we had since our arrival here back in 1967 became a reality when we purchased our first property here in Carneros. I wish you could see this. My house is located in the middle of this very beautiful, storied Pinot Noir vineyard here in the southernmost part of Napa County. And from the very beginning, we knew that eventually we wanted to release our own brand. So we purchased our first property in 83. We were able to develop it and planted to Pinot Noir vines in 1986. Our first harvest was in 88. And we've been making a barrel of wine since then, because you can, not for commercial purposes, but anyone who has a vineyard is allowed to make a barrel, which is about 50 gallons, translates around 20 cases, for personal consumption. And we continued acquiring more land. And by the mid-90s, we were ready to launch our own brand, but no one was willing to drop what they were doing to start something from scratch. So I left just a fantastic job in the wine industry every time I tried to quit, I'd be offered so much more, uh, more travel, more independence. So it was hard. But in 1999, I left my job in the wine industry to start our own brand. And in September of that year, we filed the articles of incorporation to found Ceja Vineyards, and I was elected president of Ceja Vineyards, and very historical, as I became the first Mexican-American woman ever elected president of a winery.
That's amazing.
But it opened the door to so many more women getting engaged in this industry. And I'm very, very proud and conscious of my responsibility to make sure that I can also mentor, future women vintners coming into this industry.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think it's incredible. I mean, you don't hear every day, about a farm worker now coming into owning their own piece of land and, really coming out on top. So it's really great. It's really wonderful to hear that. And, I'm interested to know how, you talk about like being a mentor and things like that. How has it been for you now on the other side? Like, how have you decided to do things differently, like with your vineyard and the way that you run your business, compared to how you saw it, on the other side, how things were being run?
Well, it's a very different environment. In the 60s, it was only the men that came to work. Agriculture in the US, very few of these men ever brought their families. It really didn't start to happen until late 60s, after that immigration reform that I mentioned earlier under Lyndon Johnson. But then increasingly, these farm workers would bring their families as well. So at that time, there were not enough workers, especially during harvest. Many workers were brought in from San Francisco. Busloads of other workers, because there were not enough farm workers. So, and of course, there were not a lot of children either working in vineyards. So things are much different, because now literally 97% of the workforce in vineyards hail from Mexico. And they're both men and women, right. And of course younger workers as well. But it was also not being that there were not a lot of Spanish speakers at that time. Like, it was harder to actually be in school, because they didn't know what to do with the children that had just arrived here. There was no bilingual ed, and it was just a totally different environment. But in the actual grape growing business, now there are a lot more like vineyard managers that are Mexican American or Latinos, and it's in our industry, in this vineyard agriculture industry, we have to offer better wages and of course more benefits, because the competition for workers, it's pretty tight. And it's also the right thing to do,
right?
And especially after Cesar Chavez and Dolores were organizing workers in the 70s here in Napa Valley, then it became easier to organize, and it also the whole environment changed in that workers were able to now, laws were passed due to the farm workers, the UFW influence, to protect farm workers and to allow them to have like overtime pay and collect unemployment benefits. Because before that, do you know that farmer workers didn't have the right to collect unemployment? And working in agriculture is seasonal work. So I don't know what the workers did when they were laid off, because the season was over. So there've been a lot of changes, but nonetheless, there's still so much more to be done.
Exactly. And, I want to skip over to another question I had, since we're talking about, farm worker justice and organizing. You brought up Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, and we actually had the pleasure of interviewing Dolores a couple of years ago, and just amazing, incredible the work that she's done. But in the film, you talk very fondly about your father, Felipe Moran, a migrant farm worker who later became the president of the United Farm Workers Union in Napa Valley, and who was a vineyard foreman for 35 years. And I wanted to touch on, the way that he inspired you, and how his journey and his story and dedication to farm worker rights and justice work, really kind of encouraged you, or maybe taught you when you were younger, and, to where you are now. So yeah, anything you'd like to add about the stuff that your dad was working on would be wonderful.
Well, my father was influential, not just about how I feel about social justice issues, but an entire generation of farm workers, as well as the next gen of our own children. So he cared very deeply about the rights specifically of agricultural workers, and he worked tirelessly and fearlessly to make sure that they were treated fairly, that they had that they had fair salaries, and also that they had protection. I mean, the UFW, where it represented workers. I mean, it actually negotiated. There was like medical care negotiated, and it just literally changed everything for workers, but not just here in Napa Valley. I think across the entire California, but across some of the other Western states where the UFW was quite active. And my dad had a sense of that in order for our community to thrive, not only do you need to take care of your own family, but bring everyone alongside with you as well. And that's why he never was in the Bracero program, which started during Second World War, where a lot of workers from Mexico were brought in. Bracero means brazos, so people that were willing to work pretty much in agriculture, in anything. And he said that was sort of indentured servitude. So he thought he would never do that.
Right.
So every time he crossed the border, he actually came here undocumented, because no human being is illegal.
Right, exactly. We agree with that. Yeah, I love that. I love that you brought him up too in the film, because it was at the perfect scene where they're talking about organizing and the importance of all of these different organizing groups and activist groups coming up. And so yeah, I really wanted to hear more about that. I thought that was really fascinating about your father, and I got to read a little bit more about him after watching the film. There's another part in the film that was really striking for me personally, and I'm also Mexican American background, family from Mexico, so we know how farm worker labor is here and migrant labor is here, but every time you see it, it's kind of shocking over and over. And so something that stood out to me in the film was in the beginning, we see farm workers Benito and Carmela. They start their day very early, 4:30 a.m. We see Benito taking his child to the sitter's house because they know they're going to be gone all day. He gets back to board the bus at 8 with the rest of the crew. They take a long ride out to the tomato fields, and then they're forced to wait on the bus for several hours before being called to work. And that's when we learn that from the moment they get up and the moment they board the bus, and that whole time on the bus and being forced to wait, that they're not getting paid at all. They're not getting paid anything for the commuting or waiting. And in fact, they don't start getting paid until they finally fill up their first bucket. And they return home around 8 p.m. It's a long 15-hour day. And when the paycheck comes, we see that for a whole week's worth of work, he only got $42.27. And something that you said in the film really stuck with me about this glaring separation of two different cultures existing parallel to each other, but there's no bridge. You mentioned that there's the sense of them and us. And, it's true. I see that also, and I feel the same way also. And I just wanted to know, why do you think that our food and labor systems have been able to maintain this separation and maintain this kind of exploitation and unjust treatment of our farm workers for so long?
Well, it's all about money. And of course that there in history, there's never been an equitable way of sharing because excess labor is what creates capital. And so all of the work that the farm workers do is creating capital for, in this case, in the wine industry, for the wine industry.
Right.
And even though a bottle of wine from Napa Valley can sell for hundreds of dollars, often, that those profits are not shared. And also, if you maintain these two totally separate bicultural identities, not really having a way to connect, then it's a lot easier to control the narrative.
Right.
And so it's purposely done. I mean, it's changing. I mean, I can see it slowly over time where there is a lot more of integration of now that the next generation, like the second or third generation of children of these immigrant folks. I mean, like, I can tell you, in our case, both my husband and I were born in Mexico, and we came here as children. But now our children who were born here, but they were raised with this pride about their bicultural identity, they are the ones, that are also helping to bridge, that gap.
Yeah.
And now their children. And I also see that like millennials are so much more adaptable to diversity, to a diverse community.
Yeah.
So I have great hope more than ever that this is going to change.
Yeah.
But everyone, because we literally have a symbiotic relationship. So winery owners and grape growers would not have anything to sell without this very highly skilled labor force, and the laborers also need to have jobs. So once that there is that deep understanding of how incredibly interconnected and how we depend on each other, and how we both the workers and the winery owners both have to succeed, and to provide a life of dignity for their families. And what I see, it is changing slowly over time, but I have seen it change. I see the change.
That's great. Yeah. Thank you for answering that. It's always good to get a perspective from someone who, well, when you were in the film, but also just, that's the work that you do, and you see it firsthand. And so it's great that you're seeing changes there too, especially in a place like Napa. You talked about the housing too, how housing is very difficult, when people, it's such a popular place to go now. And when a place gets highlighted like that, it gets very difficult for the workers to afford housing and to do things like that. And I was wondering if you had noticed a change in that also, or like what is it like right now, the current situation for farm worker housing or things like that.
Well, it's the reality is very harsh because very few workers can afford to live in this highly tourist place that is wine country. Everyone wants a piece of it, and people are willing to pay exorbitant prices for real estate. So that drives up the price of homes. And the established workers that arrived here like in the 60s and 70s, it was easier to get your foothold and own your own home. But in the 90s and 2000s, it's incredibly hard. And now we see a lot of workers commuting from as far away as like Stockton, Yuba City. Just like those workers in the film, that they their homes really, really early in order to be here, 7 or so. And then typically, vineyard workers work until, depending upon the season, but during the summer, 3:30. So they won't get home until like 5:30.
Yeah.
So it's we're talking a 12-hour hour days, and that's it's very harsh.
Yeah.
In an ideal world, it would be so awesome to have affordable housing, and there is a task force that is heavily engaged in finding solutions, because everyone knows that a healthy community is where the not just the people that provide the jobs, but also the workers are able to live.
Yeah.
And I see there is also big change, because there's actually a lot of studies being done and how to increase housing so that it's more affordable to workers that work in the vineyards and hospitality workers.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I can't wait for the day until we see more of that. It's going to be incredible. So hopefully, with more awareness from people, and spreading the word and getting people involved, whether it being in organizing or activism, I hope that these things continue to push these changes forward. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Amelia, for speaking with me today. I want to give you some time right now to just share, about what you're working on. What is Ceja Vineyards doing? How can people support you? I want to leave that space for you so that we can share with our supporters of the festival, how to do continued support from now till always.
Well, thank you so much, Linda. And yes, I feel very strongly about the quality of our wines that we produce at Ceja Vineyards, and they can be purchased online at cejavineyards.com. Your viewers and supporters can join, subscribe to receive our newsletter. So that way you can be in the know about everything Ceja, about what's happening in the vineyard, recipes, because I'm a chef too, food and wine pairing suggestions. You can join our wine club, and we host numerous events during the year. One that is coming up is on September 10 is our pickup party, but it's also a new wine release party. So not only are our wine club members invited, but as well as anyone that wishes to come and join us. And our social media platforms, they're all Ceja Vineyards, and all Amelia Ceja, Instagram, Facebook, X, LinkedIn, etc. But most importantly, we also invite you to come and visit us. We have a lovely tasting room that is open Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays from 11 to 3, and it's very beautiful, and your palate will thank you. And an FYI, today would have been my father's 99th birthday.
Oh, that's so wonderful. Well, happy birthday to your dad.
And I miss him very much, but what his legacy continues in the quality of our wines. And a sip of our wine is a sip of so much more than just the wine itself, a sip of history. And it really shows the highly skilled labor that the workers really allow us to make these very beautiful wines that compete with the best in the world. So support Ceja Vineyards wines.
Absolutely. Oh, I feel so honored that we got to talk on your dad's birthday. It was meant to be. Well, thank you again, Amelia. And as a reminder to everyone watching, don't forget to sign up for this year's Food Justice Film Festival at foodjusticefilmfestival.com. The festival is free to watch and free to sign up, and you can view all of our 4 feature films anytime from September 14th through the 17th. You can also catch all of our 2023 virtual interviews on our site all year long. Thank you all for watching and have a wonderful day.